Hello, welcome to the Tech for Good podcast. We are very passionate about two things, technology and our world. In each pod, we will be interviewing some fascinating people, business leaders, but those with a special interest in solving the biggest issues facing humanity today. Think the environment, think healthcare provision during a pandemic, think global social injustice. If you want to know more about technology's immense potential to fix and transform, then you're in the right place. In this episode, I speak to Vinay Nair. Vinay is CEO and co-founder of Lightful, a company which supports the charity and volunteering sector with software and technology. Charities have had to adopt digital tools quickly during the pandemic, but a challenge still exists around skills. In the interview, I discuss this problem with Vinay, plus we talk about Lightful's work with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. But first, I ask him about the scale of the impact that COVID-19 has had on the sector.
Yeah, absolutely. Ben, thank you so much for having me on. And it's great to be able to talk about the charity sector because, it's such a big part of our lives. Last year, 95% of British households either volunteered or gave money to a charity. So it's really kind of an ever-present part of everyone's lives. And like every other sector, massive disruption. We definitely saw that element of 10 years of digital acceleration happening in those first 10 days, if not, a little bit beyond that. And charities immediately knew they had to respond at the same time as demand for their services went up as well. So it was kind of this spike in demand, lockdowns, and trying to figure out whether they're working in healthcare or in any other sector, how they could continue to support the more vulnerable members of society. So initially there was a real hit in terms of events. You think London Marathon is one of the best known kind of peer-to-peer fundraising events, all of the in-person elements going down. So there was a real worry right at the start that a lot of charities may not make it through the kind of early stages of the pandemic. But a combination, I think, of a couple of things meant that the worst predictions didn't happen. Where, for example, some were maybe able to furlough, they were able to look at some of their cost sides and be as prudent as they possibly could. But also many adapted to digital, both in terms of service delivery. It could be as straightforward as Zoom and Teams, although that took a bit of adjustment, to be honest, for many, many charities, or when it came to digital fundraising. And so the sector actually responded really well, as it so often does in moments of crisis. As things have evolved and sort of the backward and forward of reopening and the hybrid world, I think we're entering into a different and perhaps more challenging stage of not just being in that acute response of digital action, fundraising, service delivery, but actually figuring out in this hybrid world how charities can not just survive but thrive.
And what part, Vinay, do you think digital plays in that world that you talk about there, the one we're now sort of emerging into? I want to say post-pandemic. It's not over, of course, but where things are a bit more normal. Those tools that charities may have sort of had to use and the transformations they had to undertake in rapid time. Do you think they're becoming a sort of part of the fabric now of this sector? What is the current digital landscape, would you say?
I would say it remains pretty mixed. I think in terms of immediate deployment, charities, as I had mentioned, have done really well in terms of that acute stage. But as people's expectations of kind of digital first engagement increases and is kind of here to stay, whether that's staff or volunteers or donors or end users, charities are really trying to kind of have some of the tools and some of the skills, but by and large, the feedback that research and surveys are saying is that 70% plus, 71% in one piece of research that some academic bodies did, where there isn't enough skills to actually being able to sustain building resilience through digital. And I think that's probably where there's a recognition, whereas perhaps a couple of years ago, some trustees might say, why do you need the social media and what's it about? And tell me a little bit more. I think that conversation is over. People get that irrespective of age, seniority, or experience. But having the right tools and skills and support is not generally available, particularly I would say, Ben, for those smaller charities, which is that big tail. And, think how much more we did in our local communities, right? Actually, it was a great equalizer in many ways, COVID, for those big brand name charities with much more local community groups. So I think that's where we're seeing a little bit of a struggle to see how, both in a hybrid world and for those looking for that digital first engagement, younger people and so on, how charities can, to be honest, thrive more, which is, I guess, what Lightful does and what we're keen to help facilitate.
And we'll talk about the work you guys are doing in a minute, but let's focus, Vinay, on that skills problem specifically. How big a problem, first of all, is that when we consider what you've just said there, especially for the smaller charities, the smaller organizations who are often made up, I'm guessing, of just a handful of people who are doing a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
How big a problem is it?
It's a big problem, Ben. So I think you're right to focus a little bit on that smaller segment. The medium and larger charities also, by the way, aren't by any means clear and out of the woods or have all the capabilities that they would want. There's still a lot of work that they're doing. However, I think as your question framed, it's those smaller organizations that probably need the most support. Going into the pandemic, more than half of small charities didn't have a digital strategy in place. So we were kind of starting at that point a little bit on the back foot already. There was a recognition by some, but definitely not by all, and not even by most, that a core digital strategy across every part of the organization, whether it was internal operations, your CRM and database, your fundraising, your service delivery, really wasn't in place. I mentioned that response stage. People realize, wow, this can potentially work and potentially work well. And ultimately see how you can strengthen relationships through digital engagement. But now I think it's something like 73% of organizations saying they don't have that skills and tools required to be able to find more effective ways on a more sustainable basis to engage. So it's, and 81% of charities have said that they fundamentally changed how they work on the back of pandemic. That may be no great surprise. I guess the challenge is to see that, unfortunately, the closing of the gap is still some ways to go. And I think that's going to be a big priority for the sector in the coming months and years.
Before we get on to what your company specifically, Vinay, is trying to do about this problem,
Mm-hmm.
what do you think, from your experience in the industry, are the key steps that the industry needs to take to try and solve this problem of the digital skills gap?
It's a lovely question, because I think you can sometimes get into quite extreme thinking of like, well, Web3, this is what we need to do. And, the distributed ledgers as a way of democratizing decision making, It's like, okay, that's good. And I think there are some opportunities around, leapfrogging and things like this that will exist for smaller charities, for campaign groups and so on. But I think, in truth, Ben, we need to recognize some of those basic elements. When I'm talking about the ability to kind of engage, communicate, fundraise, serve, whether it's online, social, digital, email, newsletters, there's a lot that requires how do you take some of that storytelling, which, I think charities have, brands almost look at charities with this unfair advantage that they have these great, authentic stories to tell, which actually should be this massive opportunity and advantage, yet it's not really taken. So how do you take some of that storytelling and apply it to your major gift fundraising, or work with trusts and foundations and so on? So I think it's a recognition that things are moving very fast. There's a new book coming out by two of the leading authorities in nonprofit tech, who you'll know well, Ben, Alison Fine and Beth Cantor, and the book is all about smart tech and AI and NLP and kind of that next generation. And I think, as I mentioned, quite excitingly, Web3 does offer a number of opportunities. But where I feel we need to have that conversation is a little bit more of the basic ladder, those earlier stages, to democratize, make sure people have that ability to access the tools that are fit for purpose for the sector. This isn't e-commerce. This is a very unique way of how organizations and people engage with each other. And recognize through those initial building blocks, you can build a more sort of stable footing from which you can support, enable charities to grow. So it's funny, because I'll often be asked around that cutting edge of innovation, which I enjoy to speak about. And you do see really great examples, particularly for those medium-sized and larger charities deploying, I don't know, chatbots or machine learning. That's something that we do a fair bit of, or AI and so on. I think that's great. But if we're talking about the sector as a whole, let's remember the different segments of it, and particularly as we felt through the pandemic, that local sort of organization, whether in the global north or, of course, in the global south as well, and support them in those early stages as well.
Hi, I'm Daniel Brigham, editor of the Tech for Good magazine. I hope you're enjoying this pod, and if you want more, why not head over to techforgood.net for some amazing and thought-provoking stories. You can read about one company's mission to use digital technologies in the fight against HIV, or learn how social media can help refugees take control of their narratives. For those insights and more, read and subscribe at techforgood.net.
Tell us about Lightful then Vinay. What does your company do?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. No, I guess as probably I've aired, I'm very passionate about helping the charity sector, community groups really to be able to amplify their voice and strengthen relationships between, good people and great causes. To be honest, we believe that those doing the greatest good deserve the best technology. And, our real passion is that, rather than thinking for other sectors that maybe are benefiting a lot, what about the charity sector that's doing work that's needed more than ever? So that's our underpinning, our Simon Sinek start with why. I guess I feel I need to begin there. What we do then is, a couple of different things. First, we do a lot of digital capacity building for small charities. Typically, we'll work with a large foundation like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation or Comic Relief, who either have hundreds, if not thousands, of grantees or work in cause areas which they're really trying to support. And through their funding and support, we then provide 6 or 12-month digital capacity building programs where through learning management systems, they can learn how to tell better stories, get some of those basic building blocks in place so that they can, crescendo on International Women's Day or at COP26 or on Giving Tuesday, or whatever it is, to raise more funds. And it's been very exciting we've helped over 1,200 organizations now, 50 plus countries, to not just get the competence around digital, but the confidence as well. And I think that's something that shouldn't be underestimated. It can be quite lonely being volunteers or one of the few employees working at these organizations. So building peer networks and cohorts of these groups is a big part of what we do through Lightful and Lightful Learning. We also work with some of the larger charities and trusts and foundations and university groups and various others to help a little bit more in terms of their more sophisticated needs. Often that will be in terms of how they manage their data and their systems, their customer relationship management system, their CRM, and customizing that to ensure better workflows. Sometimes it could be not glamorous, it could be about helping efficiency. We work with Citizens Advice to help them to be able to reduce the friction that it took place for their volunteers to do local search for, food banks or legal services, so that they could serve more people through the pandemic. And that required much better data plumbing in order for the experiences and the outcomes to be better. So, we work with a range of nonprofit organizations in lots of countries, ultimately with this idea of how do you build better online experiences so you can strengthen relationships.
Really interesting stuff, and clearly a broad scope of work. May I ask you, Vinay, about what the mentality is of and how these people and how the people within organizations or charities are embracing digital and technology? Do you feel like there's a sort of warm embrace for these technologies which are potentially changing their industry, or from your experiences with your company and the, as you said there, the different clients you've worked with of different sizes in different countries, what's the general sense you get about how people are feeling about this change?
I think there's definitely a positive sort of proclivity to find how technology can be used as a force for good. The name of the podcast, it's really, I think, a sentiment that exists quite broadly. So I'd be very, very positive and upbeat about that. And as I said earlier, some of the barriers in terms of some people, often trustees or chief execs, who are less familiar with technology or maybe not digitally native and so on, I think some of that melted away through pandemics and just general life moving towards sort of online. So I think the mood music and the general attitude is really very positive. I think what is very welcome, I would add as well, Ben, is there's also a healthy skepticism around the bounds of technology and social, and understanding, if we're talking about tech for good, what does that look like? And I'll give an example of a campaign that we initiated, but now sort of is used by many organizations for several years now, every March, called Reclaim Social, where really our focus, and we have thousands of charities and millions, tens of millions of sort of engagement and so on, if not more, of people saying, well, how do we reclaim social media for good? With the hashtag Reclaim Social, meaning for keeps as well as for positive impact. And I think charities recognize that there are limits as well, and part of our job is holding truth to power as a sector, and that needn't just always be government, although oftentimes it is, but it can be for large corporates, and ultimately thinking about poverty, inequality, social justice, equity, and so on. So I think there's also a healthy skepticism that exists within the sector to say, right, what are the bits that we want to embrace, and what are the bits that we recognize can really support us? And then ultimately it's about shaking out, charities are resource constrained, time, money, people. That's, I guess, our firm belief that, things need to be much more fit for purpose, so that it can support those organizations wherever they are in that spectrum to be able to deliver more outcomes, and for technology to kind of multiply that.
Okay, great stuff. I want to bring it back to the skills point again, Vinay. Now, another initiative of Lightful's is the Bridge program. Tell the listener about that and how it's trying to address the skills shortage specifically.
Yeah, thanks, Ben, because I alluded to it earlier, and Bridge is a program that we started actually a few years ago, pre-pandemic. We did the original pilot with Comic Relief, where we worked with 80 of their exiting grantees. And the idea really is, how do we support an organization to build greater resilience through digital? Bridge stands for Building Resilience in Digital Growth and Engagement. Let me give you an example. There's a wonderful charity based out in Sierra Leone called Advocate. And what they do is they really work with helping women and girls that are trapped inside of the legal system, and give them the support so that they can get due process and reasonable justice as well for their work. Very powerful, and a lot of potential for supporters, not just across Sierra Leone, but with diaspora, the people passionate about international development, criminal justice reform, and beyond. And so an organization like Advocate was supported to go on a 12-month bridge program by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who's a close partner of Lightful's, funded them to go through it. They alongside another partner called Global Giving. And what Advocate then did is they started with doing attending a series of masterclasses that Lightful runs. So Beth Cantor is the master trainer. It could be on areas like, storytelling with dignity. How do you represent, for example, some of those end users in the right way? It can be a series of, and we have a series of workshops that are more tactical. Maybe it's about working on LinkedIn, more around influence, and how do you actually storytell that way? And you sort of, through a series of masterclasses and webinars, Advocate and many other charities through Bridge start learning some of the key skills they require. We also have a team of relationship managers at Lightful, so they get Advocate and others will get one-on-one support to say, okay, we're planning this on International Women's Day in March of next year, and rather than just announcing it on the day, how do you kind of build that story, build your engagement, kind of close the loop to keep people supported, whatever that call to action might be. Maybe it's a fundraising ask on International Women's Day, so how do you kind of crescendo to that? And we also have what we call the Lightful Academy, which is a series of videos and playlists and quiz for people able to go deeper at their own time, rather than the kind of attending the masterclass, especially through lockdown, with kids barging into your Zoom calls and all the rest, to be able to really deepen your knowledge. And all of that learning can then be put into practice with a social media management platform that we've built, natively, specifically for small charities. And over the course of that time, success begets success. We saw organizations raise, 64% more funds year on year, which is 3 times the industry average, when the Gates Foundation funded us to do a kind of a treatment control group study last year. As I said, it's sort of a confidence builder as well, and the ability to take some of those stories into other realms of not just everyday giving, but your major gift fundraising, into your newsletter, into how you engage with others. And the idea of resilience, I think, is something, it's a word that I embrace tightly, because it's going to be vital, and it's something that you can build on year, help organizations to find new forms of unrestricted income, think about their sustainability and their scale. And through that bridge program now, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, we've supported over 1,200 organizations, and it's something that's growing at a rapid pace, thanks to the support and funding of large trusts and foundations in the US, UK, and beyond.
Who says children can't change the world? Our Teenage Tech Stories podcast showcases the extraordinary work of young entrepreneurs on their way to becoming tomorrow's tech leaders. Listen now via the Tech for Good podcast stream or by visiting techforgood.net.
What's next then for Lightful and Vinay? Like, how are you going to take this even further?
Thanks, Ben, because we're very mindful, despite the progress that we're making and the impact, I guess, we're helping organizations to achieve. There's a lot more to be done. Whether it's on environmental impact. One of our most recent cohorts was 200 nonprofits across the US tackling racial inequities. And there are a lot of, we're working in women and girls, international development, homelessness in London. Like, there are a lot of very powerful and much needed, frankly, ever increasing needed areas to work. So at one level, we want to stay focused and do more of what we're currently doing. So that Lightful learning piece is thankfully really expanding well, and we would like to do even more of that. We're also helping some impact SMEs, individuals, members of fellowships, to be able to amplify their voice, but also protect themselves from online harms as well. So really expanding that out, as well as working with larger charities on their more digital transformation type of programs. We did a really exciting digital transformation partnership with the Rhodes Trust. We're working with other really big scouts and really wonderful bigger charities that are more recognizable and have the potential to also deliver, multiply their impact through technology. And ultimately, with what we learn across that work, can we build more and more fit for purpose products, digital products, that can help democratize some of those insights that are more affordable for that long tail of charities around the world. We're translating into Spanish and looking to German and all sorts of stuff. So the need is there, and I guess we want to go a little bit deeper as well as try and go a little bit broader as well.
I can tell you're a techie, Vinay, for sure. And I want to ask you a bit more about you mentioned no code platforms earlier. When you think about the products and the advanced technologies that are going to sort of transform things, do you think, when talking about no code specifically, do you think that is a key thing in kind of linking charities who might not have the skills and tools right now to getting to where they need to be fairly quickly? It's a bridge, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's a bridge, exactly.
Yeah.
I think it's an important part. As we were talking about earlier, Ben, there's so much of the basic needs required. I think finding ways to effectively listen to those charities and voluntary groups and so on around what their needs are and being able to respond is key. I think no code platforms or low code platforms have a very important role to play. But I think recognizing also, I mentioned the paucity of time and resource and money, that actually being able to synthesize some of what we're learning and into kind of more affordable, into very affordable products for the larger tail. I mentioned that's something we're thinking about, I think is a big part of it. We work with Salesforce a lot as well, and understanding some of the power of very big ecosystems and platforms to be able then to, again, customize for nonprofits or education institutions and so on, I think shows a lot of premise as well. And yes, I mentioned some of the next stage of Web3, which we're working on, and we are working particularly in some of that smart tech. I mentioned machine learning a little bit as well. And again, thinking about the ethics that need to run through it and the opportunity set that exists there. I think that's a little bit further away. other than a few early adopters and early movers, and they will be wonderful to give the demonstrable stories for other charities in the sector to do. So I think we need to, even though these things are running concurrently, I think there's a little bit of sequencing we need to get in place so that we make the most of low and no code technology, as well as some of the rapid developments that we're seeing as well.
And talking more generally about tech for good, and you can relate it to your sector if you like, but you mentioned Salesforce there. I don't expect you to talk about them specifically, but the big tech companies who have got this enormous resource and capacity, do you find that more and more they're angling their priorities to social good enterprises, and surely there's going to be a residual benefit for your sector there, isn't there, as these companies try and do good for the world ultimately?
Yeah, I think that's completely right, Ben. I welcome it. Lightful as a technology company, we're also a B Corp, a certified B Corporation, where we enshrine and kind of legally encode our commitment to people, planet, profit as well. And so I think there's something to look at with the large technology companies in terms of substance and what are they actually doing, not just in their direct channels, which is, as I said, I really welcome. You talk about Salesforce, we can talk about Microsoft. There are a lot of sort of companies that are authentically committed to this work and to our sector. I think we also need to look at the other aspects of what they're doing as well, and make sure that there's no sort of element of little bit of offset of doing harm, and then seeing if they can kind of redeem some of that offset and do some good. I think it's important in the round to be able to assess technology companies and say, right, great that you can support the charity sector, for example, and please continue to do that and do more of that. But also in the round, are you doing work? Are you building the products and services that are building, greater justice, greater equity in society? And I think there is going to be more accountability. I hope there is, and charities, by the way, are doing this as well. More accountability for those companies, tech companies, to do that as well.
And on a final point, do you imagine a future, Vinay, where an amazing future where the charity sector is transformed completely by technology? And for you, as someone who obviously is at the heart of that change, that must be a tremendously exciting thing, a tremendously motivating thing for you kind of every day, to imagine how these technologies can actually really make proper change and help people on a much bigger scale than is possible right now.
I do get very excited, Ben, and I love how you framed it around how technology can be transformational for, as I said, we believe those doing the greatest good deserve the best technology. So I'm motivated by what you say. I think we need to recognize that it's a hybrid piece as well. I think the connection that you get from human engagement or working and supporting more vulnerable members of our society, working on climate and so on, that technology has some role to play in that. In the mix of, it could be that, for example, you've saved some volunteers more time so that they're able to spend more time doing it. So, it could be direct or indirect, but ultimately, I think technology can play a causal role to help that, to help these organizations and movements to be able to deliver their objectives. And for sure, speaking of tech for good, that motivates me in a really big way.
That was the Tech for Good podcast. Listen, subscribe, and rate us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Stitcher.